Well, folks, the Florida governor's race in 2026 is finally beginning to heat up right now, and it looks like it could be a primary matchup between Trump-endorsed candidate Representative Byron Donald and the wife of the current governor, Ron DeSantis, who would be Casey DeSantis, which could set up a huge proxy war within the GOP. We're going to dive into everything today regarding the 2026 Florida gubernatorial election. But before we get into it, drop down below, hit that subscribe button, and don't miss another video from our channel in the future now. So regarding Casey DeSantis, we know that, or I guess the DeSantis clan, we know that incumbent Governor Ron DeSantis is term limited at the end of his current term in 2026. And he's really wasting no time preparing for who is going to take the job after him. His wife's name has been floated around in many donor circles in Florida politics. And the donors at least want Casey DeSantis to stop and listen to the people who are encouraging her to run. Listen to the people who could potentially throw support behind her, put money behind her, and run for her husband's current office. Now, back in December, a poll was conducted that showed Casey DeSantis with the best name recognition in the race at that time. We see that, 57% of Republicans had a favorable opinion of Casey DeSantis, a higher rating than any other names floated. Let's see. And then there was one other down here. Let's see. Here we go. Gates garnered 39% unfavorable, 18% favorable, and 38% who had never heard of him before. And then let's get down to, okay, here we go. Ashley Moody, never had heard of her, 54%. Byron Donald, 66%. And Simpson, almost 80%. Almost 80%. Didn't know who Willett Simpson is, who's the Florida Commissioner of Agriculture. Wow. But Casey DeSantis, obviously positioned good from this initial poll, is positioned pretty well, got good name recognition. She's polling halfway decently inside of the Republican Party right now in Florida. So you never know. But since then, the governor, his wife, they've both been toying with the idea of running in 2026 to really be a third term of Ron DeSantis. And although she has not officially entered the race, she is seen as a top contender for the seat in the GOP primary. Now, as far as Representative Byron Donalds goes, Donalds, who is endorsed by President Trump. President Trump had already thrown his support behind Donalds before he even jumped in the race at that time, which led some to believe that he did this just in order to squash the idea of another DeSantis in office for another 4 years, or to squash succession plans for Ron DeSantis. In most recent polling, since Donald has jumped in the race, they found, and I'm going to pull it up right here, they found that now 34% to 30% Byron Donalds versus Casey DeSantis in a head-to-head matchup in the GOP primary. But then when the respondents were told that Trump has endorsed Representative Byron Donalds, he picked up about 9 points. Casey DeSantis lost about 7 points, which the margin of error is still 5%. So it's like, obviously this is outside of the margin of error, but ultimately it's early on right now. There's still a lot that could happen in this race. A lot to unfold. We could see how, Casey DeSantis hasn't even jumped in the race yet. So maybe when she jumps in the race and there is a serious bid for it, a serious play for the GOP base, I think that could change things. So when in a head-to-head matchup, and here's the thing, when people go to the polling booth, they're not going to know. They're not just told when they get there, oh, did you know Donald's is endorsed by President Trump? No. If they know, they know. If they don't, they don't. DeSantis, it's like, this is still a pretty close race here. And DeSantis isn't even in the race yet. We are literally just looking at Byron Donalds in the race as of right now. And, there have been some GOP primaries in the past that have bucked the endorsement of President Trump in the past. But I do have a hard time seeing it in a Florida election, but ultimately this is on DeSantis' stomping ground. This is where DeSantis turned a state from, you look in 2018, DeSantis won the state by 30,000 votes? About 30,000 votes he won the state by. Not even half a point he won the state by. 0.4% he won the state. He then went on in 2022 to win by a landslide victory of 20%. He won the election by over 1.5 million votes. against the former governor, Charlie Crist. So DeSantis has become very, very popular. He started to garner support immediately after winning the election. Then COVID hit. He kept the state open. He did not violate individuals' rights. He gained a lot of support from the Republicans, from Democrats and independents in Florida, which now is why the Republicans have a 1.2 million voter registration advantage in the state of Florida. So this could be tough. I do have a hard time seeing the GOP in Florida bucking the endorsement of President Trump, but also this is DeSantis' stomping ground. This is where he turned a purple state into a deep red state. Like this could be a true proxy war you're setting up here. But then you look on it on the other hand. If you remember back to 2018, yes, DeSantis won by 30,000 votes, but look at the GOP primary. The GOP had a very crowded primary that was very competitive until President Trump jumped in, endorsed Ron DeSantis, which elevated him and helped him win the primary in 2018, and of course went on to win that close election against Andrew Gillum, eventually turned the state into a GOP powerhouse in his re-election in 2022. But remember, DeSantis, like we said, I'm going to say it another time, only won by 30,000 votes in a very tight race. You saw over 8 million votes cast to only be separated by a tiny margin. It's not something I expect to see in 2026, but DeSantis has transformed the political landscape in Florida from a blue/purple state into a solid red state at this point. The real matchup is going to be in the primary, with Donald's already already in the race with the backing of the kingmaker in the GOP, and it's hard to see any other serious contenders outside of DeSantis or Donald's jumping in the race as of now. So you're going to be really looking at a split ticket between DeSantis and Donald's. And like we said, it's a big feat to overcome a Trump endorsement, but it's not impossible, especially, like we said, considering DeSantis turned this state red. DeSantis turned this state red. And now we know, along with Casey DeSantis, Matt Gaetz has also shown some potential interest in jumping in this race, although, I expect him to run for AG in Florida. I don't expect him to jump in. But then you also have people like Ashley Moody, who replaced Marco Rubio in the Senate when Marco Rubio became the Secretary of State. But as of right now, she has declined to jump in this race, as she has to run in 2026 for her special election to get a full 6 years in the Senate. So the real question is the DeSantis brand ready for another proxy war? This wasn't even a proxy war. This would be a battle. Is the DeSantis brand ready for a battle with the Trump brand? And although they're so similar in different ways, there obviously are some differences. Look at what happened in 2024 in the GOP primary. Not a great look for the DeSantis brand. Hindsight is 2020, but it probably wasn't the best idea to jump in that race. So maybe they should be looking for trying to see some insights from what they did in 2024. Is it the best thing to do? Nationwide is a lot different than Florida. I'll give them that. But they really need to take a deep breath, consider what is going to be best for the state to move forward. And if they decide that DeSantis is going to jump in the race, look, I think Casey DeSantis would be a great candidate because obviously she's going to be an extension of Ron DeSantis. And Ron DeSantis was probably the greatest governor of my lifetime. As of right now, the greatest governor of my lifetime. And it's different. When you're in Congress, you are one of, 438 people. You're a grain of sand in a vast desert. And being the executive of a economy of a state is much different than being a representative. It's like, that's why it's so hard sometimes for senators or representatives to jump in like presidential races or governor's races, because it is a much different job. You are the head of the executive branch in that state or in that country, versus you are one of the elected members in a legislative body where your vote really doesn't go that far unless you're undecided on a vote that is very, very close. But ultimately, Donald's hasn't really been a part of the big victories in Florida. Most of the big victories have come at the state level with DeSantis and the Florida legislature, not with federal representatives, which is why the federal representatives almost are very inconsequential unless they get into leadership. So we're going to see what happens. we're going to see, is DeSantis going to jump in this race? Is Donald going to run? It's like if DeSantis doesn't jump in this race, I see a lot more people jumping in. But if DeSantis gets in, I really see it as a head-to-head matchup between DeSantis and Donald. And I think it's going to be a fist fight. It's going to be a close, probably within 5 points at the end of the day. We're going to see what happens, but we're going to be here to bring you updates. Whatever happens, if DeSantis jumps in the race, we'll be here to bring you all the insights from it. But that's going to wrap things up for today, folks. Let me know, what are your thoughts down in the comments. Should DeSantis stay out of the race and just let Donald run? Should she jump in the race? What are your thoughts on it? Smash that like button, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you never miss another video from us again in the future. You guys have a good rest of your day.